ആപേക്ഷിതമില്ലാത്ത വ്യക്തിത്വം ശശി തരൂർ, എഴുത്തുകാരൻ, പത്രപ്രവർത്തകൻ, ന്യായീകരണ രാഷ്ട്രീയ പ്രവർത്തകൻ, ഇന്ത്യയിലുള്ള മുഴുവൻ നയതന്ത്രജ്ഞൻ, മുൻ കേന്ദ്ര മാനവ വിഭവശേഷി സഹമന്ത്രി, മുൻ കേന്ദ്ര വിദേശകാര്യ സഹമന്ത്രി, നിലവിൽ ലോക്സഭാ MP ശശി തരൂരിനെ കേരളത്തിന്റെ 4ാം പതിപ്പിലേക്ക് ഹൃദയപൂർവ്വം സ്വാഗതം ചെയ്യാം.
Namaskaram, good evening. As you rightly said, today we have a guest who doesn't require any form of introduction.
Some people seem to feel I need a conclusion.
I wouldn't think so as of now. But I think the only possible introduction which I could think of is Shashi Tharoor is Shashi Tharoor. We don't have to say anything more about our guest today. As someone who has lived outside of India, we used to mention Dr. Tharoor on our news desk like the most sophisticated Malayali walking the planet Earth. And you know, if words were weapons, I think he could be the most mightily armed human being today. And he has single-handedly managed to send India scampering back to its dictionaries every time he tweets a new word. But of late, Shashi Tharoor has also left many of us scratching our head whenever he speaks on the issue of Sabarimala. This and many more, we will ask him. You know, as we are discussing your book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister. Okay.
This is the Malayalam edition. അപ്പോൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ ഈ പുസ്തകം ഇന്നലെയാണ് പ്രകാശിപ്പിച്ചത്. അപ്പോൾ ശരിക്കും ഇന്നാണ് ഒഫീഷ്യലി നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കാണിച്ചു തരാൻ. പണ്ട് കാലത്ത് ഒരു ചൊല്ലുണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ഒരു കാട്ടിലൊരു മരം വീണാല് ആരും അത് കണ്ടിട്ടില്ലെങ്കിൽ മരം വീഴുന്നു. ഫിലോസോഫിക്കൽ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ. ഇതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഇപ്പോൾ പുസ്തകം ഫോട്ടോഗ്രാഫേഴ്സ് പടം എടുത്തിട്ടില്ലെങ്കിൽ പുസ്തകം പ്രകാശിപ്പിച്ചോ എന്നാണ് ചോദ്യം. സോ നൗ ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഒഫീഷ്യലി റിലീസ്ഡ്. ഇതാണ് നമ്മുടെ മലയാളം എഡിഷൻ.
We have a Malayalam edition, but yeah, but I thank you. But I was telling Dr. Tharoor that I would still stick to English because he's at his savage best when, you know, he speaks in English. So namakku Malayalatilla book undengilum we'll have the conversation in English. I hope you wouldn't mind.
പക്ഷേ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ I don't mind afterwards. We'll have a question and answer also.
So, you know, when I first read your book, the first thought that came to my mind is, see, you're definitely a writer with 18 titles in your name. So there's no question of credibility as a writer. But you're, as a congressman, you're a staunch congressman writing a book on the paradoxes of a BJP prime minister. So were you concerned about, you know, how the objectivity of that book would be perceived among the readers?
Yes, and that's why the book is as fat as it is. Because I knew that if I were to just write a sort of quick and dirty book, it would be considered a hatchet job by a Congress MP rushing to say something before the elections. And that's why I chose to write a very substantial and substantiated takedown of the Prime Minister and his rule with a large number of references and footnotes. If you look at the number of footnotes, there are certainly over 200, if I'm not mistaken, in the book. We have tried to source everything very credibly. The book stands up on its own merit, and what is more, I have to also worry about my credibility as an analyst. So I don't want to write something which can be easily refuted or which turns out to be inaccurate or whatever. So it's in that spirit that I've written it. At the end of the day, Mr. Modi will be gone, I will not be in politics, but the book, I hope, will endure, at least in libraries. It must stand up as a document of its time, and that's what I've tried to do here.
Because why I asked this question was, you know, now we have a movie called The Accidental Prime Minister and Anupam Kher playing it. There's a lot of people questioning, like, how can a staunch BJP man bring any form of reality into that movie? I haven't seen that, so I can't vouch for it.
Well, I'm told that you shouldn't waste your money on it. I've just been looking at I've been looking at the reviews. I think one publication gave it 1 star Another publication gave it no stars. So you may have better uses for your money.
Okay, so please heed to that warning. And when you write this book a few months ahead of the elections, isn't it any publicity good for Mr. Modi?
That is a fair question, except that I don't think it's possible to actually add to or subtract from the saturation coverage Mr. Modi already enjoys. To be honest, in terms of the amount of time, space, and so on that the Indian media gives Narendra Modi, even a 500-page book cannot significantly add to it or detract from it. What I want to do is to reach that segment of our book reading public that cares about political ideas and issues and thinks about them. I was once reminded of this anecdote. There was a 1950s American politician called Adlai Stevenson who ran for president in 52 and 56 and lost both times. But the story goes that a lady met him during the 56 campaign and said, "Governor Stevenson, you are definitely going to be elected president because all the thinking people in America will vote for you." And he smiled and said, "Sadly, madam, I need a majority." And you can say the same in India because I've had similar conversations in India. But I want to reach the thinking people. I want at least for them to, if they've been having any harboring illusions about this government, or having any hesitation about how to analyze what has happened to this country over the last 4.5 years and now almost 5 years, then this book is the book for them.
See, in 2014, when Mr. Modi came to power, you were willing to give him some benefit of doubt.
Yeah.
You were even generous with your praises on Mr. Modi, and I think which even gave rise to some rumors that Mr. Tharoor is going to join the BJP. Can you explain to us when and how did you make this change?
Okay, well, first of all, the rumors were extremely silly because anybody who has read my work for over 30 years knows I've been very consistent on my principles. I've stood up for our pluralist society. I believe in an India for everybody, whether I'm writing history or writing politics. My view is very much of an inclusive India that takes people of all faiths, all castes, all regions together. So very clearly, the kind of bigotry and divisive communalism of the BJP's agenda could never have appealed to me. But yes, I did speak in a positive tone about Mr. Modi for two reasons. Number one, because I felt, and this is in the immediate aftermath of the election, that you needed to respect the people's verdict. Whether you like it or not, the people of India had voted for him, and I felt that as a Democrat, it was my duty to show respect for democracy and for the democratically expressed wishes of the Indian people. Second, what Mr. Modi was saying was actually pretty good stuff. He was speaking some very inclusive language, sabka saath, sabka vikas. He said, I will be a prime minister for all Indians. He said, the constitution is my only holy book. He said, the government has no business to be in business. He said, I will give you maximum governance, minimum government, all of these very liberal pronouncements. And I said, if I acknowledge these statements, then I'm in a better position to hold him accountable for his statements by signaling that these are the yardsticks against which we will judge him. So the argument was, let us take him at his word now, and if he fails to live up to his word, we can say, look, we gave him the benefit of the doubt, but he didn't deserve it because this is what he's done. However, within 6 months, it became very clear that my hopes were misplaced. I published a book called India Shastra, Reflections on the Nation in Our Time, in December 2014. In fact, quite a few people brought me copies to sign during the signing session a bit earlier. And in that book, I wrote an introductory essay saying that Mr. Modi has been saying all these liberal things which I've just quoted, but the central contradiction for Mr. Modi is that he rests for support on the most illiberal elements in Indian society, the RSS and their ilk, the people who have been busy rewriting history, trashing science, promoting their love jihad campaigns and their ghar wapasi campaigns and God knows what else. And I said that in this contradiction may lie the seeds of his future failure. Now, this was black and white and written and published in December 2014. So when I wrote this book 4 years later, I was able to begin it with the words, I told you so. And I did, after all, signal very clearly that this is where the big paradox of Mr. Modi might result in his failure as Prime Minister. And then the rest of the book essentially demonstrate that Mr. Modi spent the next 4.5 years making my worst fears come true.
I can say that for sure with the latest election results, Congress definitely has reasons to be positive about the next elections. But interestingly, Mr. Modi still continued to be the Prime Minister's most loved and loathed among, if you look at the social media, it's a fine example. So how is Congress going to deal with that? Because it's about, as you said, Moditwa.
Yes, but at the same time, we don't have a presidential system in India. If indeed the public were given a choice between Mr. Modi and another individual politician for a presidential kind of system, it's possible that he would get more votes. But then don't forget, it depends on the system. In America also, Hillary got more votes, but Trump won more electoral college seats and he actually won the presidency. So the system still matters. Individual popularity, even in a presidential system, is only one element. But in India, we don't have a presidential system. We have a parliamentary system. The only people who actually get to vote for Narendra Modi are the voters. If that is where he's going to contest again. He has actually done so badly there, he may rethink whether he should contest from Varanasi again. But the truth is that the way our system works, you elect MPs to represent you in Parliament, and then the aggregate sum of all those MPs decide who will be your Prime Minister and who will rule the country. Now, in the case of the coming elections, you have always, in any election, of course, to make these two choices. Who do you want to represent you in Parliament? Who looks after your interests properly? And secondly, which parties' beliefs and philosophies and so on are most congruent with your own? And very often, people tend to give greater weightage to the first factor. Sometimes some people give greater weightage to the second factor. Very rarely is it the Prime Minister who dictates the electoral vote. But let us assume that for maybe even a third of the electorate, Mr. Modi is the feature. We have to remind them that the way our system works, everything will depend on how many seats each party gets. Even if the BJP comes out as the largest single party, if they have, let's say, fewer than 200 seats, which right now looks certain that they will have fewer than 200 seats, even if they're in a position to form a government, they might easily turn to another leader who would be more acceptable to the allies. Therefore, to vote for a BJP candidate you don't because you think you'll get Mr. Modi is actually a fallacy. So there's no guarantee you'll get Mr. Modi anyway, even if the BJP. But of course, I don't want people to vote for the BJP anyway. I want them to vote for the Congress and its allies. I think we will offer a better government.
But what I want to ask you is, see, when you talk about people are not voting for a personality, you are pitting Rahul Gandhi, as you have even spoken about his qualities, that he's good to be a prime minister. So it's going to be a clash of personalities. It's going to be Modi versus Rahul Gandhi, no doubt.
Well, look, obviously, every party runs to win. And if we get an absolute majority in the Congress party, then naturally our leader would be expected to be Prime Minister. But we have to have enough maturity to recognize that there is also a possibility that we will have a substantial number of seats, but it may not be a majority. In which case, if we are going to form a coalition with a number of allies, obviously the views of those allies are going to be very important in determining who should be Prime Minister. It may not necessarily be our leader. It might be a leader of a smaller party. It all depends on the consensus amongst the coalition. So let's wait and see the results. There will be some pre-poll alliances. There'll be some post-poll bargaining and alliances. But at the end of the day, everything will depend on which party has how many seats and whether the combination of parties gives you a majority or not. When UPA 1 was formed, Congress had 145 seats. But the other parties all said, no, we want Sonia Gandhi to be Prime Minister, and then she made way for Manmohan Singh. In UPA 2, of course, we had well over 200, and therefore there was no question in the minds of even the allies. It had to be Dr. Manmohan Singh continuing. Now, tomorrow, we don't know what the numbers will be, and none of us has a crystal ball. All I can say is we will do our best to fight a good election campaign. We will put forward our message, and if the public decides to vote for us in very large numbers, then certainly our leader will have the first claim. But if it turns out that the public balances this with some regional parties and so on, then there'll have to be a discussion as to who should be Prime Minister.
Before we go back to the paradoxes of the Prime Minister, since you spoke about elections and alliances, I would like to ask you this question. I'm quite tempted to ask you this question. this is a decisive battle both for BJP and the Congress, and maybe one of the most ugliest elections that we are going to.
I'm afraid so.
Yeah, that we are going to see. So, are we going to, or as Indians, do we have to brace for a lot of paradoxes where your party, including, will tie up with communal factions for the sake of protecting secularism, much like the war for peace?
Well, look, there is a difference between communal parties and community parties. We have tied up with parties which do represent a particular community or a minority community, but on the basis that they're committed to a secular program. To give you one example, the Muslim League is a very important component of UDF here and of UPA in Delhi. They are, as their name implies, a party principally of the Muslim community. But we would argue they're not a communal party in that they are dedicated to a secular way of life, to a pluralist society, and to coexistence and cooperation and harmony with people of other religions and faiths. So that distinction must be borne in mind. I don't think you'll see the Congress ever getting into bed with any variant of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad or people like that.
So on that assurance, I'm going to delve a little deeper into the paradoxes that you have mentioned. Though, these paradoxes that Modi has brought in is playing in scary proportions in front of us. One which I would like to point out, and you have written at length about it, is Modi has consistently attacked your Prime Minister Manmohan Singh as the Maun Mohan Singh. And one of the glaring paradoxes is that he has he's always been tight-lipped when it comes to issues which matter to people which he could have otherwise reached out to these Sabka Saath Vigas. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, Mr. Modi is probably the finest Hindi language orator in Indian politics. He is somebody who is eloquent, delivers great speeches with great effect, modulates his voice to capture an audience. Terrific. But that eloquence disappears when sensitive issues come up involving the pain of his fellow citizens. So, when young Mushtaq was killed in Pune for being Muslim, silence. When Rohit Vemula hanged himself in Hyderabad, silence. When a father of an Air Force Havildar, Mohammad Akhlaq, was murdered for carrying meat in his bag that people suspected was beef, silence. When Pehlu Khan, transporting cows to a dairy with a permit, was beaten and the killing was shown on YouTube, silence. I can give you example after example when 6 Dalits were flogged in Rajasthan, silence. So you have all these examples, and you contrast it with something like Barack Obama after a high school shooting in America, how he would come on television, share the grief of the families, basically say that I am also feeling the pain of the people, become a figure of moral authority and moral leadership in his country. And you contrast that with Narendra Modi, who shows no moral leadership, prefers to retreat into silence. And then the other aspect of this, very frankly, is this is the first Prime Minister in the history of independent India in 71 years to have never held a press conference. He has never addressed a press conference. I mean, I have seen Manmohan Singh, the allegedly silent Maun Mohan Singh, as she was saying, not only holding press conferences, but every time he went on a foreign trip, on his plane, the press crew was invited, and on the plane, on the way back, he would have an informal conversation with all the journalists, and often it was on the record, they would film it. He had no problem with that. He was not afraid, because he knew his mind, he knew what he was actually all about, what his beliefs were. Whereas we have a Prime Minister who is only interested in appearances. And in a press conference, you can't control your appearances, and therefore he has nothing to say.
I think even in America, the Trump who trashes the mainstream media as low life, he is open to the media and he has given press conferences,
Yes,
though
absolutely.
very cantankerous ones. Another of one of the paradoxes that you have listed is about about the whole idea of Moditwa that he's brought in, which you say is more dismal than the concept of Hindutva. Because, he brings in his personality traits into the Hindutva ideology that, he's brought up in. But isn't it a fact that runs across the world and throughout Europe, if you look at, these kind of self-made, politically incorrect personalities, they are decisive, they are dictatorial, they're sweeping across the world. So do you think Modi is just a product of this phenomenon that we are seeing?
Well, There is certainly a rise in the global right. I have actually got a few pages comparing him to the Turkish leader Erdogan, and people may find other parallels, which reflect a certain tendency, a certain moment in global affairs where people, partly in reaction to globalization and to the perception that there is this rootless cosmopolitanism that has taken over the world, Davos man, as the joke goes, that in reaction to that, people have been voting for leaders who claim to be more rooted in authenticity in cultures, their own religions, their own languages, and so on. Modi and Erdogan, in that sense, two sides of the same thing. Of course, for Erdogan, it's more Islam, for Modi, it's Hindutva, but it's the same thing. But when I'm talking about Modi, it's really more than that. It is Hindutva, which is bad enough because Hindutva is an ideology, as we were saying a little earlier. On the other hand, is a political doctrine born in the 1920s out of the same sort of impulses from which fascism, Nazism, and others are born, which is an emphasis on a militarized, jingoistic, corporatist kind of state control, whole mythologizing of the nation and the people, but while stamping out dissent, stamping out different tendencies and ideas. And that very much is the impulse of Hindutva. But Moditva adds to that the personality cult of Mr. Modi. This mythologizing of masculinity, 56 ki chhati, the 56-inch chest that they talk about. Even that turns out to be an exaggeration, by the way, because when Mr. Modi's chest measurements were given to a tailor for his Ajkar, it turned out to be 50, which is pretty good, but it's not 56. So why exaggerate? But that's part of the story. Now, all of these things are part of the myth making around this assertive leader. And this kind of thing is rather dangerous in a democracy, because you are exalting one individual as larger than the institutions of democracy that underpin your country's existence. And to my mind, it's very dangerous. One of the things I've talked about in this book has been the hollowing out of the institutional pillars of support for our democracy. Supreme Court, Fourth Estate, CBI, CIC, CBC, beg your pardon? Reserve Bank, all of these institutions, which were independent and whose independence was encouraged because they really had to be beyond politics to serve the interests of the polity and society. These institutions have been hollowed out, and the drama we are seeing over the CBI these days is a classic example of how this government doesn't value the integrity and independence of India's institutions.
I think you have also written at length about this policy of demonetization as a good example of Mr. Modi's dictatorial tendencies, where nobody is consulted. You know, this was given as a shock treatment for the people. But you know, in your book, when you talk about the aftermath of demonetization, what happened, nobody has ever spoken about what made him introduce demonetization. What was the intention behind it? What would you gauge out of
We can
that?
only speculate, because the officially declared intentions all turned out to be false. And as you know, he kept changing the goalposts. So he started off by saying it's the so-called black money. It turned out that in fact black money was rampant. So he stopped, and then he said it's to prevent terrorists from using counterfeit money. Turned out that the very, very little counterfeit money, what there was, came back into the system anyway. Then he changed the goalposts and talked about a cashless society, soon modified to a less cash society. But as I joked at that time, there's no cash in our pockets, no cash in the banks, no cash in the ATMs. That's the only cashless society he's created. In many ways, we really are left scratching our heads as to what the possible justification could be. Part of it was his love for what Boutros Ghali in Egypt used to call stealth and sudden violence. That's a way of actually striking like a cobra strikes. Come quietly, make no zoom, you bite. That kind of thing gives him a sense of control of power. That's one sort of semi-psychological explanation. The most cynical political explanation is that the sole purpose of this exercise was to win the UP Assembly elections by completely depriving the other parties in the fray of their stocks of cash. The assumption was that the other two parties, particularly the BSP and the SP, had, so it would seem, a good collection of money ready for the campaign, and suddenly all that money became invalid, whereas the BJP had been tipped off and their money had already been banked and was legal, and so suddenly they were in a position to sweep the state, which indeed they did sweep the state. So I don't know, that may seem an excessively cynical exercise to destroy a country's economy, hit the GDP by 1.5%, kill lakhs of jobs, ruin the winter harvest, create misery for daily wage workers, shut down small and micro enterprises, all that for the sake of one state election. But with these people, anything is possible. That's the only, at least logical or rational explanation one can get.
Another very interesting paradox in this book is, and you're an expert in that, that's why I'm particularly asking this, about India's foreign relations after Modi has become the Prime Minister. And you know, he's notoriously traveled to more than 51 countries, if I'm right.
59, I think, yeah.
Okay, and spent more than 335 crores of taxpayers' money.
400 plus, as far as I know. And what is more, Anjana, he has spent cumulatively 1 year of the last 4 years abroad.
Yeah, that's right.
People don't realize that. He has been out of the country for 1 full year out of 4 years.
Yeah, so that's what people say that he's
82 countries, 59 trips.
Yeah, so he's a visiting Prime Minister. You know, despite all of this, you know, his foreign trips and much hyped foreign trips and visits and his personal dynamics that he shares with many foreign leaders, you have argued in this book that India's foreign relations, vis-a-vis with the US, vis-a-vis with China, with Bangladesh, you know, lies, I mean, he hasn't
Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, you can go through the list.
Nothing substantial. How do you substantiate that argument?
Well, I mean, the fact is Mr. Modi has traveled a lot, and to be honest, though we were slightly jokey, the truth is that he did put a lot of personal energy into his travels, and let's acknowledge that. He has gone out there, he's tireless in his travels, that's fine. That's a good thing, provided it actually brings results to the country. That's where the problem is. There have been no results particularly apparent, and if you look at country after country, we're only seeing failures and setbacks. He goes out and hugs world leaders, but they don't seem to want to hug him back in terms of substance, because if you look at the US, we had the humiliation of President Trump turning down his invitation to come to Republic Day. If you look at China, we've had the Doklam crisis, where the Chinese essentially started building a road that is only useful in the event of a future war, where the Chinese have continued vetoing the blacklisting by the UN Sanctions Committee of terrorists like Masood Azhar, where the Chinese are continually blocking India's admission to the Nuclear Suppliers Group. So there's nothing going well with China, and the terms of trade still mean rather colonial terms of trade, where we are sending our raw materials to China, $19 billion of exports, and they're sending all their finished goods to us and destroying our industry with $61 billion of imports from China. So there's practically nothing good to be said about the relationship with China. With Pakistan, the question one asks is, does Mr. Modi even have a Pakistan policy? It's not at all clear he does. On the one hand, he runs a campaign saying, you know, this Congress people gave chicken biryani to the Pakistanis. Then he invites Nawaz Sharif to his own swearing in, but I assume if not chicken biryani, he would have given him some good food. Then you see them having sentimental letters and saris and shawls exchanged to each other's mothers. And then within a month of that, they're firing heavy artillery across the border at each other. You have talks arranged between the foreign secretaries in Delhi, and then suddenly cancel the day before they are to happen on the grounds that the Pakistanis doing something that they've always done, which is to talk to the Hurriyat first. Then having made this big drama that if you're talking to Hurriyat, we don't want to talk to you, suddenly the NSAs meet in Bangkok. All this is the first 6 months alone, and it keeps getting worse. You see Mr. Modi sitting at the SAARC summit in Kathmandu, ostentatiously reading a brochure as the Prime Minister of Pakistan walks past him, so he doesn't have to say hello. And then it's revealed that he actually met the Prime Minister of Pakistan in an Indian businessman's hotel suite the same evening. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he had been very critical of any overture that Dr. Manmohan Singh might have made during his time as Prime Minister, saying that until Pakistan shows real progress on terrorism, we don't and we should not allow any Indian leader to go there. And yet, with no progress having been made, on a complete whim, on impulse, he flies off from Kabul to Lahore to attend Nawaz Sharif's birthday and his granddaughter's wedding. It was such a whimsical and impulsive decision that there was not enough time for the Indian High Commissioner in Islamabad to actually get to Lahore airport to receive his own Prime Minister. That was how hastily and ill-considered that decision was. Now, I can give you 20 more examples, but if you read the book, you'll get them all. My point is that this kind of policy making has been disastrous. Foreign policy has been reduced to an episodic series of photo ops with no systematic follow-up. The foreign minister is known in the diplomatic community in Delhi as the Minister for Consular Affairs, because she spends all her time helping Indians who lost their passports and people who want to come from Pakistan for heart surgery and so on, but she's not actually involved in substantive foreign policy. And you've got all of this going on, and at the same time you have a situation in which our country is facing humiliations like the Maldivians. Until this recent election 2 months ago, there were advertisements for the last 1.5 years coming out of Maldives for job vacancies in Malé and in the islands saying Indian citizens need not apply. Now, can you imagine tiny Maldives so dependent on us that when they ran out of drinking water, we had to fly in plane loads of water so they could eat, they could live. And Maldives is slapping us in the face. There's something fundamentally wrong with the way in which we've been conducting foreign policy.
And coming to my next question, one of the biggest fears that after Modi has come, or the biggest change that we have seen in the political and public space, is the curtailing of free speech. We have seen books being called off, the movies are getting banned, editors are getting fired. So you have recently introduced this private bill, where you want to abolish the section 295A and 298 of IPC, which are considered as blasphemy laws. Basically, authors can be punished for undermining the faith of or the religious sentiments of people. Could you explain, is this also something that after Congress comes to power, that the intellectual community can look forward to, where there will not be curtailment of books and intellectual, creative space will not be put into a corner?
I hope so, because certainly it would be my intention to recommend that. But in any government, it's the people responsible for a specific portfolio who get to make the final call on it, and I can only make a recommendation. However, in the manifesto consultation process, I'm a member of the manifesto committee, and I intend very much to push for this. I believe, in fact, that's not my only private member's bill. I've also introduced a private member's bill which would take away the censorship powers of the Board of Film Certification. They're meant to certify films. They're not meant to tell directors, you cut this scene, you bleep that word, you cut this thing. That is not, any free democracy, artistic expression should not be treated that way. If a filmmaker makes something which you believe will cause certain consequences, then you have a more restrictive certificate. You can have many categories of certificate to bar certain things, from the impressionable young minds and so on. But this kind of interference with freedom of expression, I think, ought to be curbed. And I have used the private members' bill route in a dozen different bills to try and actually promote a wider, more expanded sense of our freedom. So this bill you're referring to is what I call the Freedom of Literature Bill, where I'm trying to protect not only writing and literature, but the KLF is the right place to talk about literature, but also art and other forms of expression from the hostility of those who are easily offended. In our country now, groups are competing with each other for the right to be offended by works of art, by works of literature, by works of writing. And the result is they rush to the courts, and because they have this law they can rely on, and they sue. Almost invariably they tend to lose if a case goes far enough up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has so far held the freedom of expression to be above their right to be offended. But very often, particularly smaller people, smaller publishers, filmmakers and so on, they say we can't afford to have the expense and the hassle of fighting a case, we'll rather surrender. So publishers, even Penguin, pulped a book because they felt it was not worth fighting this case. So I would think the best thing for us to do is just remove the provision of the law that makes this kind of harassment possible. And that's why I would delete this provision from the Freedom of Literature Bill.
Talking about paradoxes, I cannot let Dr. Tharoor off the hook without asking him about another paradox, which I think is the mother of all paradoxes, which we are all grappling with, which is, a sworn secular like you has taken a stand where, you have decided to ditch women's equality when it comes to, again, faith and religious sentiments. How do we deal with this, Dr. Tharoor?
I honestly don't think I've ditched women's equality. In fact, I think I can say with some pride there's no MP, not even a woman MP, who has spoken up as much and introduced as many bills on women's rights. In fact, even in the last session, the winter session, I put forward a bill on criminalize marriage and rape, give women the complete authority of their autonomy and integrity, and that it protected men's clothes rights, including mandating the provision of free sanitary pads and so on in all government institutions and clinics. I am very, very strongly of the view that equality is almost too mild a word, because in my own experience, I find women to be the superior sex. They are really, we are lucky as men that all they want is equality. But the time will come when we will be asking for equality against.
Now you're saying all the
No. I've said this before. I've said this consistently. And I can tell you already, today's world, look at what's happening in the intellectual space. I'm frequently invited to convocation ceremonies. You're looking at a situation where, I'm not exaggerating, 85 to 90% of the top prize winners in the science, in medicine, in engineering, in dentistry, all of these colleges are women. There are maybe a majority of male students, but the prize winners are the women, because this is increasingly a world in which knowledge, application, dedication, concentration, all of these qualities are being rewarded. But let me come back to your question. I'm not ducking the question. I initially, as you know, spoke up for the rights of women to enter Shabarimala. And then I realized, when I talked to many people in my constituency, including a large number of women, a very large number of women, that they didn't see this as an issue to be framed as one of equality. If you frame the issue as one of equality, there is only one possible answer. Anybody in the Congress party would have to tell you we are in favor of equality. But if you frame the issue as one of sanctity, it becomes a totally different proposition. The proposition becomes, here is a temple which has a certain set of beliefs associated with it. As you know, there are hundreds of Ayyappa and Shasta temples throughout Kerala where women can freely go and worship of any age. But Shabarimala is subsumed in this legend of how the deity had promised Mallika Purathamma that he would marry her, but he could not marry her at that time. She wanted to marry him. So he said that he would not set eyes upon a woman of reproductive age until he was ready to marry her. So, and then he goes to the temple, he goes to the shrine, he hides away from women, and as you know, his spirit enters into the pre-existing deity. That is the legend. As you know, there is also a temple to Mallika Purathamma not far away, waiting for him, as it were. Now, if you believe this, now I'm sure there are many here who don't believe it, but if you do believe it, when you go to that temple, you go with that belief. And in that belief, if you're worshipping a deity, you have to respect his decision, as it were, not to be in the presence of women of reproductive age. Now, you can be rational and you can give counter arguments. I've had many rationalists telling me, what can a deity see? Even if the deity can see the woman, does he lose his celibacy merely by seeing her, etc.? You can argue all of these points. But this is not an issue for rational debate. It is an issue of whether faith must be respected as faith or not. Now, in many, many Western democracies, similar dilemmas have come up. And they've all been resolved differently. For example, in Greece, there is a peninsula on which Mount Athos sits. Mount Athos is a monastery, but there's also a collection of other monasteries around it. And the entire peninsula, some 50 square kilometers, is barred to women. Women cannot even get off a boat in order to go there, and this is enforced by Greek law. In the Catholic Church, in every Western country, women cannot be priests and bishops. I'm just saying.
Do we have to compete with the negative examples?
No, but let me give you some positive examples. South of Trivandrum is the town of Kanyakumari. What is Kanyakumari named for? The Virgin Devi. And there is the Kumari Amman temple. You can go, if you're a man, only to the outer courtyard. The inner sanctum sanctorum is reserved only for women. Now, if you apply the same principle of gender equality, and a man goes to the Supreme Court and says, I want the right to go inside, and he's allowed to go, and he does, don't you think it will destroy the sanctity of that temple for lacks of women? And which is the greater public good? See, as an elected representative, it is my job to be concerned with the public good. And I also have to look at the people I'm representing and ask whether I can respect what matters to them or not. Now, if, for example, a member of the public said, I hate Dalits and I'm not going to let them into my house, whatever, I would oppose that. And I would feel that I could explain to them why that belief is wrong. But for this one, where there is a very specific story, where it is not a general discrimination because no other Ayyappa temple is affected, where it is specifically caught up in the entire, the people who go frequently to Sabrimala go profoundly believing this. Given all of that, it is my duty as their representative to respect the passion of their faith. And you know, it's like, if, for example, I'll quote, I won't name him because it was a private conversation, there's a Muslim League leader in our state who said to me that he realized, he said, that most of the Hindus he knows feel about Sabrimala the way he felt about the destruction of the Babri Masjid. That was the kind of kick in the guts kind of feeling. And that was to me a very interesting analogy. Now, why would I want to disrespect that?
But I think at the end of the day, you know, especially with the current political climate that we see, with Congress or leaders like you taking the stand, the seculars or the who believe in gender equality, they feel like they are caught up between the devil and
No, but I'll tell you, we're not taking the stand the same way the BJP and the Sangh Parivar are doing. Not in the streets, we're not obstructing anybody, we're not throwing stones, we're not vandalizing cars, we're not attacking the police. We're saying, because with the believers, we want to see a constitutional solution to this. So we have indeed supported the review petition before the Supreme Court. 2nd of January, the Supreme Court is going to hear in open court a series of petitions. These arguments will undoubtedly be made. If the Supreme Court still sticks to its decision, the only other alternative would be legislation. The same issue arose in America in a different context in 1992 when Bill signed the Freedom of Religion Act, which protected certain forms of religious worship. If the BJP government really believes in this issue, then they can easily draft the Freedom of Religion Act that protects certain kinds of religious worship and spiritual. If there is a legislative solution, the Congress will stand behind it. But we will not be in favor of violence in the streets. The BJP sadly wants violence in the streets. They don't want a solution. They Bahalamandake Sheshamana Avirka, public in the Edil, and that is the sad thing about our politics. You know, we must understand the importance of the distinction between the way the Congress has opposed the issue, saying only the legislative route will work, and the way the Sangh Parivar is an issue, trying to make themselves out to be heroes of some sort of resistance, whereas they know perfectly well they can't solve the problem that way, but it gets them better TV coverage on Janam TV, and that's why they're out there doing it.
Since we are short of time, and before I open the floor for questions, I still maintain that, you know, when there is a moral crisis, Congress and Dr. Shashi Tharoor has, Dr. Shashi Tharoor has, you know, hasn't stood with the law and the constitutional rights of women.
I stand completely with the rule of law. I have never betrayed the rule of law. If in the end this is the law of the land, I will be with it. My point is that the rule of law is being disrespected by the BJP, the VHP, the Sangh Parivar, the RSS, not by the Congress. Congress is saying you must find a solution within the rule of law.
I'll open the floor for questions. Please raise your hand.
There are hands. You just pick whoever you. But there should be a mic for them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there are somebody.
We have seen the Congress president, who is not only the Congress president, the great grandson of Jawaharlal Nehru, visiting some of the temples, mosques at Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh, etc. So don't you think that he's, with his actions, he's contradicting the basic ideology of Indian National Congress or Nehru? And
no.
So, question, and that you have regarded Narendra Modi as, paired with Erdogan. Then, so don't you think, or who is the apt person to take the role of Fethullah Gulen in this scenario?
Okay, first on the question of whether what Rahul Gandhi is doing is a betrayal of the beliefs of the Congress. No. The message, in fact, is that we should not confuse Hindutva, the political doctrine of the ruling party and its supporters, with true Hinduism, which is a religion of inclusion and acceptance. I like Vivekananda, I prefer the word acceptance to the word tolerance. The tolerance is essentially patronizing. It says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in the right to be wrong. That's tolerance. But acceptance, which is what Swami Vivekananda spoke about, says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And that is the basic principle of the Congress Party. We believe not in secularism in the sense of abolition of religions, but respect for all religions and none of them being privileged by the state. So for us, let a good Muslim be a good Muslim, let a good Christian be a good Christian, let a good Hindu be a good Hindu, no problem. But neither you privilege one religion, as the BJP RSS ambition of creating a Hindu Rashtra in India is unacceptable to us, nor should you attack other religions, so the Hindutva political doctrine is unacceptable to us. It should be one of inclusion, of taking everyone along in the Indian adventure. And as Rahul Gandhi has openly said, if I go to a temple today, if I'm invited to a mosque or a church or a gurudwara, tomorrow I'll go there too. It's a way also of showing respect for the beliefs of your voters. I'll resist the temptation to find you a Fatullah Gulen in this country. I'm sure there are a few, but we should leave that for a price. That's a reference to a Turkish figure.
Hello, sir. Every single or silly people know that what is Modi and who is Modi and what he doing to our country. So my question is that what sense makes you to write this book?
Because in fact, even though you believe that everyone knows it, many haven't had their eyes opened yet. It's surprising. I have conversations every day with people who still have bought into the BJP propaganda. I was so astonished. Just a few days ago, I was at a wedding in Trivandrum, and the people were talking to me there and asking me about this book. And they were saying, oh, but Modi has raised India's stock and image around the world. And I said, no, he hasn't. And they said, Modi has done wonders for the Indian economy. I said, no, he hasn't. And they said, Modi has done this, Modi has done that, because they've been getting all these forwards, WhatsApp University is what's educating them. And WhatsApp University doesn't rely particularly on facts and accurate figures. So here is something you can refer to, extensively documented, footnoted, and where all the information is there. And I hope that people who are serious about politics will read it. I don't mind being challenged, but my facts here in every case are fully stated, and many people will get their misconceptions removed if they read this.
Good evening, sir. My question is again about Sabrimala, and I'm from Trivandrum, so
okay.
I'm your constituency. The Supreme Court has been very clear that it is upholding constitutional morality and not majority. And the Congress has taken a stand with the BJP. How much you defend it, it does not matter. The Congress has supported the BJP in every way in this issue. What I have to ask is, recently you wrote an article defending your stand. I think you tweeted it yesterday, saying that constitutional morality, but the majority stand, you're with the public. So if this is the case, what can we expect from the government? If the Congress is winning in 2019 elections, what can we expect? Because you also tweeted recently about an IAS officer resigning in protest of the Kashmir issue. Even in the Kashmir issue, it has always been the same case. So what do you think these stands are?
Well, it depends on what specific angle you're looking at. As far as the Sabrimala issue is concerned, as I said, the big difference between our stand and the BJP stand is that we believe in constitutional solutions, and the BJP, despite being in power in Delhi with a crushing majority in the Lok Sabha, has not even attempted the legislative route. So you have to understand the cynicism of an exercise in which they are deliberately creating violence on the streets, reducing a sacred shrine to a stage for political theatre, because it's all about politics. And the Congress, you have to give us that much credit, has not played that game. The Congress has played, if you like, the role of a constructive opposition to this judgment, saying that because large numbers of people have shared their pain and their difficulty with this judgment, the Congress stands by them, but in the pursuit of constitutional means to address the issue. Now, there are only two constitutional means left. One is a review petition. Remember, there was a 4-1 judgment, and the arguments made by that one dissenting judge have found a lot of echo, including by op-eds by previous Supreme Court justices that have retired. It's not that the whole argument is settled. The Supreme Court decides, hear a review petition at a later date, some decide to refer the matter to a larger bench, or it could reaffirm its existing position. We don't know. If they do, then there will only be one option left, and that will be legislation. And then the challenge is on those who are in power. BJP is in power. They have the budget session coming up in February. Will they want to bring this forward? It's their call. But we're not going to take the heat off them. We want to put the heat on them. They have the mandate as the government to solve this problem rather than creating problems on the streets, which is what they're doing. On Kashmir and so on, there are some issues in which it's more a question of a difference of emphasis and approach. We certainly, obviously, believe firmly that Kashmir should remain part of India. But we would have seen that in the last 5-6 years, opportunities have been missed that could have been seized. There was a period of relative tranquility, which turned out to be the lull before the storm. But the BJP, during that tranquil period, actually formed a government in Kashmir with a party elected in the valley, representing Kashmiri Muslim Valley, Kashmiri Valley Muslim opinion, and yet they did not take this opportunity to embark on a dialogue with all stakeholders in Kashmir and move towards a lasting solution. They just let the opportunity go, and that, I think in all fairness, has been one of the biggest disappointments of the Modi government in terms of its Kashmir policy. But you know, it's a little too facile to equate the Congress and the BJP on everything. There are important differences. If you're doing so because you have a left perspective, let me say that I have many friends in the left, and I'm appalled by their cynicism, because what they're doing is deliberately needling the Sangh Parivar with the sole motive of ensuring that they create this bahalam in the streets, that as a result, the CPM and the left hopes that enough Congress Hindu votes will go to the BJP so that the Congress will lose and the left will win. That is the cynicism behind the CPM's exercise. So nobody comes out of this issue covered in glory.
Do we have time for one more question?
Go ahead. Whoever has the mic.
Good evening, sir. I have been
After you. The mic can go to him.
I have been watching many YouTube videos about how the 2000 election have resulted. So the people, it was completely based on the opinion of people from North India. So when the anchor asked them, they said that they are very disappointed with